They gave my promotion to the man I trained. Then they asked me to train his replacement too. My name is Elena. For 7 years I was the person who actually ran our department. Not on paper, but in every way that mattered. I knew every client. I fixed every crisis. When something broke at 2 a.m., they called me, not my manager. And when the senior role finally opened, the one I had been promised, the one I had earned 3 times over, they gave it to Brandon. Brandon, who I had personally trained 8 months earlier. Brandon, who still asked me how to handle difficult clients. Brandon, who got the title, the raise, and the corner desk, while I got a quiet conversation about how I was too essential in my current role to move. I said thank you. I smiled. I went back to my desk. And then I started doing something none of them expected. This is the story of how the person everyone took for granted quietly documented 18 months of truth. And what happened when I finally decided to stop being essential. I want to start by explaining what essential actually meant, because that word became the trap they built around me. When I joined the company, I was ambitious and a little naive. I believed the thing they tell you when you're young. Work hard, make yourself indispensable, and you'll be rewarded. So I did. I learned everything. I said yes to everything. I became the person who could solve any problem, handle any client, cover any gap. And it worked at first. I got early praise, small raises, the warm glow of being needed. My manager, a man named Greg, told me constantly how much the department relied on me. I don't know what we'd do without you, Elena, he'd say. I took it as a compliment. I did not yet understand that indispensable and promotable are, in a badly run company, opposites. That the better I became at my job, the more valuable it became to keep me exactly where I was. That every problem I solved quietly reinforced the idea that I should keep solving problems quietly, forever, at the same level, for the same pay. Greg understood this perfectly. I did not. For 7 years, I was the engine of the department. I onboarded new hires. I built the systems we ran on. I managed our most difficult, most valuable clients personally, because Greg trusted no one else with them. And because I now realize, my relationships with those clients made me useful in a way that also made me controllable. The clients loved me. They called me directly. Several told me, over the years, that I was the only reason they stayed with the company. I carried that quietly, thinking it was job security. It was, in fact, the very thing that would set everything in motion. But not yet. Brandon arrived in year 6. A pleasant, confident man, hired into a role parallel to mine but junior. And Greg assigned me to train him. I did it well, because I did everything well. I taught Brandon our systems, our clients, our processes. I gave him my shortcuts, my templates, the hard-won knowledge of 7 years. I introduced him to clients as a trusted colleague. I made him competent, because that was my job and because I am not a person who does things halfway. I want to be honest, I liked Brandon. He was easy to work with. I did not train him resentfully. I had no idea I was training my own replacement for a role I didn't even know was coming. 8 months later, the senior position opened. The department lead role. The one Greg had dangled in front of me for years. When the time is right, Elena, you're the obvious choice. I applied. Of course I applied. I was the obvious choice. 7 years, the client relationships, the systems, the institutional knowledge. Everyone in the department assumed it was mine. 2 colleagues congratulated me before the decision was even announced. They gave it to Brandon. I found out in a meeting. Greg announced it to the team. Brandon's promotion to department lead. And I sat there, my face carefully still, while people turned to glance at me with expressions ranging from shock to pity. Brandon had the decency to look uncomfortable. He knew. Everyone knew. Afterward, Greg called me into his office for the conversation. The one that betrayed people always get. He told me how valued I was. How essential. How I was simply too critical in my current role to move. That they couldn't afford to lose my expertise where it was. He framed my own competence as the reason I couldn't rise. The better I was at my job, the more trapped I became in it. And then he said the thing that changed everything. He asked if I would help Brandon transition into leadership and also train the new hire coming in to take over some of my workload. He wanted me to train the man who got my promotion and then train my own replacement for the tasks they were offloading from me. I said yes. I smiled, and I said yes, of course, happy to help, because in that moment, something in me went very quiet and very clear, and I understood exactly what I was going to do. Here is what I did not do. I did not complain. I did not go to HR in a rage. I did not confront Greg or Brandon. I did not tell anyone how I felt, because I had finally, after 7 years, understood the game I was in. And you do not win a game by flipping the board while your opponent is still stronger than you. You win by quietly changing the rules while they think you've already lost. I made a decision that afternoon. I would leave. Not immediately, strategically. And when I left, I would take with me the one thing that actually made the department run, the thing they had all forgotten I truly held: the client relationships. But I was not going to do anything rash or unethical or burn anything down. That's not who I am, and it's also not effective. Instead, I was going to do 3 things patiently, over as many months as it took. First, I was going to document everything. Every promise Greg had made me, in writing where it existed. Every instance where I was the one who actually did the work Brandon would take credit for. Every client interaction that ran through me. I would build a complete, quiet record of the truth of that department. Second, I was going to deepen my client relationships even further. Not manipulatively, just genuinely, the way I always had. Because those relationships were mine. Built over 7 years on trust, on results. They belonged to me in every way that mattered, even if the company thought it owned them. Third, I was going to prepare my exit. Quietly update my resume. Take the recruiter calls I'd been ignoring for years. Find the right opportunity, not just any job, but the right one, where I would be valued as I hadn't been here. And crucially, I was going to keep being excellent. Keep smiling. Keep training Brandon. Keep being essential. Because the moment I revealed my plan, I would lose my advantage. Let them believe I had accepted my place. Let them think the loyal, essential Elena would stay forever, grateful for the scraps. I gave myself however long it took. As it turned out, it took about 11 months. I want to describe the documentation, because doing it changed how I understood my own career. I started a private record, kept entirely on my own time, on my own devices, containing nothing confidential or proprietary, just the honest history of my own work. Emails Greg had sent me promising the senior role, when the time was right. Project files showing my authorship of the systems Brandon now oversaw. A simple log of the client crises I personally resolved, week after week. As I built this record, something became undeniable, laid out in front of me for the first time in 7 years. I had been carrying that department. Not metaphorically. Concretely, provably, in black and white. The systems were mine. The client relationships were mine. The institutional knowledge was mine. Greg managed. Brandon now supervised. But the actual engine, the thing that made the department function, was me, and had always been me. Seeing it written down did something to me. For years I had half believed the story they told. That I was valuable but not leadership material, essential but not exceptional. The documentation destroyed that story. I was not lucky to have my job. They were lucky to have me. And they had just told me, in the clearest possible terms, that they would never acknowledge it. Meanwhile, I deepened the client relationships. I want to be clear that I did nothing improper. I simply continued being the excellent, responsive, trusted partner I had always been. The clients continued to rely on me, to call me directly, to trust my judgment. Several, in ordinary conversation, mentioned that I was the reason they stayed with the company. I simply remembered those comments. And I understood what they meant. And I prepared my exit. I updated my resume, and looking at it, freshly aware of my own value, I realized how underpaid and undertitled I had been. I took recruiter calls. I was selective. I wasn't looking for any job. I was looking for the right one. It came about 10 months in. A competitor, a better company genuinely, was building out a team and needed exactly what I had. Deep expertise, client relationships, the ability to run things. The role was senior. The pay was nearly 40% higher than what I made. And they wanted me specifically because in our industry, reputations travel, and mine had traveled well. I accepted. And then I prepared to leave the way I had done everything for 7 years. Professionally, completely, and on my own terms. I gave my notice on a Tuesday. 2 weeks, professional and clean, exactly as required. Greg's reaction was everything I had quietly predicted. First, disbelief. Then, as it sank in, something close to panic. Because Greg knew. He had always known, even as he passed me over. What I actually represented. He knew who really held those client relationships. He knew what would happen when I walked out the door. He tried, immediately, to fix it with money. Suddenly there was budget. Suddenly there was a senior title available. Suddenly the company couldn't afford to lose me. The same words he'd used to justify never promoting me, now redeployed to beg me to stay. A 30% raise, on the spot. More than I had ever asked for. Available instantly the moment I threatened to leave, having been impossible for 7 years while I stayed loyal. I said no. Politely, warmly, but completely. I used, almost word for word, the language he had used on me. That I was so grateful, but I was simply too committed to my new path to make room for it right now. I watched him hear his own words come back at him. He understood. His face told me he understood. Then came the part he hadn't fully prepared for. In the weeks after I left, the clients, my clients, the relationships I had built over 7 years, began to follow. Not because I poached them, I was careful and ethical about that. But because clients are loyal to people, not logos. They trusted me. When they learned I had moved to a better company that could serve them well, many of them, of their own accord, wanted to continue working with the person they trusted. The department Greg had built on my back began to strain. Brandon, competent as I had trained him to be, did not have the relationships, because relationships cannot be handed over in a training session. They are earned over years. And I had earned them, and taken them with me, simply by being the person who had always deserved them. I did not celebrate anyone's misfortune. That's not what this was about. This was never about revenge in the petty sense. It was about correction. About the universe, with a little patient help, rebalancing to reflect the truth. That value belongs to the person who creates it, and that a company which refuses to acknowledge someone's worth will eventually, inevitably, lose that worth to someone who will. I thrived at the new company. The role I was denied, I now held elsewhere, with better pay, real respect, and the title that matched the work I had been doing all along. Brandon, I heard, struggled with the client load. Greg, I heard, spent a lot of time explaining to his own bosses why the department's numbers had dropped after I left. The lesson I carry, and the one I want to leave you with, is this. They will tell you that you are essential. Listen carefully to how they use that word. If essential comes with real recognition, real advancement, real reward, then you are valued. But if essential is the reason they give for why you can never move up, why you must stay exactly where you are, why your excellence is precisely what disqualifies you from more, then essential is not a compliment. It is a cage. And the door is not locked. You only think it is. I spent 7 years believing my value was a favor they did me. It was the other way around. And the day I understood that, the day I stopped mistaking my cage for my home, everything changed. They gave my promotion to the man I trained. So I gave my expertise, my relationships, and my future to a company that deserved them. I didn't fight them for what was mine. I simply took it with me, because it was always mine to take. I kept the receipts. And when the time came, they told the whole story. Thank you for being here for this story. New story every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you have ever been called too essential to promote, really sit with what that means. You may be more valuable and more free than you have been allowed to believe. I will see you in the next one. Let me go deeper, because the 11 months I spent preparing taught me things about work, value, and self-respect that I wish someone had told me at the start of my career. First, I want to talk about the specific psychology of the indispensable trap, because it catches so many good people. The hard workers, the reliable ones, the fixers. The trap works like this. You are competent and conscientious, so you solve problems. Solving problems earns praise. Praise feels good, so you solve more problems. Gradually, you become the person who handles the hard things. And here is where it turns. The organization comes to depend on you in your current role so completely that moving you becomes inconvenient. Your excellence, which should be the argument for your promotion, becomes the argument against it. We can't move Elena, who would handle the clients, who would fix the systems, who would train the new people. The cruel genius of this trap is that it disguises itself as appreciation. Every time Greg told me how essential I was, I heard love. I heard security. I heard, you matter here. What he actually meant was, you are too useful in this box for me to ever let you out of it. The compliment and the cage were the same sentence, and I could not tell them apart for 7 years. The way you know the difference is simple, and I learned it too late, so let me give it to you now. Valued people get promoted. Trapped people get praised. If the appreciation flows endlessly but the advancement never comes, if every reward is words and never position, never real power, never real money, then you are not being valued. You are being managed. You are being kept. Second, I want to talk about why I chose patience over confrontation, because I think the instinct of most betrayed people is to explode, and I want to explain why I believe the quiet path is stronger. When they passed me over, every cell in my body wanted to march into Greg's office and tell him exactly what I thought, to list my 7 years of contributions, to point out the absurdity of giving my role to a man I had trained, to demand justice. And if I had done that, I would have lost. Here is why. Confrontation, when you are in the weaker position, only informs your opponent of your intentions while changing nothing about your leverage. Greg held the power in that moment. If I had raged, he would have labeled me difficult, emotional, not leadership material, confirming the very story he'd used to pass me over. I would have felt better for an afternoon and damaged myself for the future. Patience did the opposite. By saying nothing, by smiling, by continuing to be excellent, I kept my true intentions completely hidden. Greg believed he had successfully kept his essential employee in her box. He relaxed. He stopped watching. And in that space, the space created by his false belief that he had won, I quietly built everything I needed to actually win. The documentation, the deepened relationships, the exit. He never saw it coming precisely because I let him believe there was nothing to see. This is the deepest lesson I learned, and it applies far beyond my situation. When you are underestimated, that underestimation is itself a resource. The person who thinks you are beaten stops defending against you. Your apparent defeat becomes your camouflage. I was never more dangerous than in the months when Greg thought I had accepted my place. Third, I want to talk about the client relationships, because this is the part people find most satisfying and also most misunderstand. I did not steal clients. I want to be precise about this, both ethically and practically. What I understood, what Greg forgot, is that business relationships are personal relationships. The clients did not have a relationship with the company logo. They had a relationship with me, Elena, the person who answered their calls at difficult moments, who solved their problems, who earned their trust over 7 years of showing up. You cannot transfer that in a training session. Greg thought he could have me train Brandon, and thereby hand Brandon my relationships. But relationships are not knowledge. Brandon could learn our systems in months. He could not become, in months, the person the clients had trusted for years. That trust was mine. I had earned it, one interaction at a time, and it lived in the client's regard for me personally. So when I left and the clients chose to follow, that was not theft. That was the natural consequence of a truth the company had ignored. That the value they thought they owned actually belonged to a person, and that person was leaving. They had treated my relationships as company property. But you cannot own a person's trust. You can only earn it or lose it. Greg lost it the day he decided my loyalty could be taken for granted forever. Let me bring this toward a close with what I understand now, on the far side of it all, in a role I love at a company that values me. The strangest part of this whole experience is that I am grateful to Greg. Not in a bitter, ironic way, genuinely grateful. Because by passing me over so clearly, so undeniably, he did me a favor he never intended. He shattered an illusion I might have lived inside for another decade. If Greg had thrown me a small bone, a modest title bump, a slightly better raise, some token of advancement, I might have stayed. I might have kept believing the story that if I just worked a little harder, proved myself a little more, my time would come. I might have given that company another 7 years, and another slowly, my whole career draining into a place that would never truly reward me. By denying me completely, he made the truth impossible to ignore. There was no ambiguity left to hide inside. The company had looked at 7 years of my work and chosen a man I trained. That clarity was a gift. It freed me. It forced me to see my own value clearly, precisely because they had so clearly failed to. I want to say something to anyone listening who is in their own version of this. Passed over, taken for granted, told they are too essential to advance. Your value is not determined by the people who refuse to reward it. This is the thing I most want you to hear. For 7 years I let Greg's treatment of me define my sense of my own worth. Because he kept me in a box, I believed I belonged in a box. But his failure to value me was a fact about him, and about that company, not a fact about me. When I finally took my skills somewhere that could see them, they were exactly as valuable as they had always been. The only thing that had changed was that someone was finally willing to acknowledge it. Do not let the people who undervalue you set the price. They have every incentive to keep you cheap. Their assessment of your worth is the least reliable assessment available, because they profit from underestimating you. And do not mistake being needed for being valued. I cannot say this enough. Being needed can be a trap. Being valued means being rewarded, advanced, respected, paid. If you are endlessly needed but never advanced, you are not in a career. You are in a cage with a very flattering paint job. The door is not locked. It never was. I spent 7 years believing I couldn't leave because they needed me too much. The truth was that their need for me was exactly the reason I should have left far sooner. My leaving didn't hurt me. It hurt them. It revealed, finally, who had really been holding that department up all along. They gave my promotion to the man I trained. And in doing so, they taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. That the people who take you for granted are showing you, clearly, that it is time to go somewhere you won't be. I took my work, my worth, and my future, and I walked them out the door. Everything I built was mine. I simply stopped leaving it with people who didn't deserve it. I kept the receipts, the record of everything I had truly done. And when I left, that record walked out with me, and told the truth in a language the company finally understood. The language of an empty chair that no one else could fill. Thank you for listening to all of it. New story every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If this reached you at your desk, in a job that needs you but won't reward you, I hope it gave you something. The door is not locked. It never was. I will see you in the next one.